What's up, hockey fans? Daily Faceoff hockey insider Frank Saravalli here on a Friday night with some breaking news. Greetings from a jam-packed hotel room. I'm at a minor hockey tournament in Lake Placid, New York. But you know what? This is worth breaking into the festivities before. I'm sure you've heard by now. Mikko Rantanen, one of the top 10 players in the NHL today, on his way from the Colorado Avalanche to the Carolina Hurricanes. It's a three-way blockbuster deal and one that, man, there's so much to unpack here. Where should we start? Let's start with the Carolina Hurricanes angle. Instant Stanley Cup contender. Think back to the last few years, one of the best and most consistent teams in the league, maybe over the last handful of years. They haven't been able to get over the hump in the playoffs, we suspect because they haven't had a game breaker. Now in Mikko Rantanen, they bring in one of the best playoff performers of his generation. 100 points in 82 career playoff games, 2022 Stanley Cup winner. And I think when it's all said and done and we look back on Mikko Rantanen's Hall of Fame career, we're going to look back and say, he did what? First ballot Hall of Famer. He had how many goals in 100-point seasons? He's been that good, yet doesn't receive necessarily all of the spotlight because he's been playing as the third spoke in Colorado's wheel behind Nathan MacKinnon and Cale Makar. Not only do they bring in a game breaker, but the fact that he's also a Finn, and you hope there can be some instant chemistry with Sebastian Aho without also having to really disrupt their roster in a crazy significant way. Yes, they give up Marty Necas and Jack Drury, but I view those players as replaceable players. Heck, they almost traded Marty Necas last summer to the Buffalo Sabres before that deal fell through, and I think we still would have looked at the Carolina Hurricanes as a capable team. Now they bring in Rantanen, and it gets to a whole nother level. I mentioned on Thursday night, hey, this was a possibility. They were not this trade specifically, but that they were exploring a JT Miller trade with the Vancouver Canucks and had a few different irons in the fire as they were highly motivated to bring in a skilled forward. This just takes that to another level. So let's dissect this from the Colorado Avalanche standpoint. Man, I'm sure if you're an Avalanche fan, you're sitting there tonight going, this is tough to take. It feels like we didn't get enough in return for one of the true best players in the league. And I could understand why you'd be feeling that right now. You say, Necas, good player, definitely one of the breakout players of the season. Jack Drury, still relatively an unknown, and we add a couple picks to our arsenal, but how are we going to compete for a Stanley Cup this year? And I think the answer to that is still to be determined. So I would urge you, if you're an Avalanche fan, Chris McFarland has 6 weeks before the 2025 trade deadline concludes on March 7th. Give him some time. I think he's in the process of exploring a bunch of different things. They definitely they're not punting on this season. They just rejigged their goaltending situation. They've had injuries and lots of different things to deal with this season. No excuses. And I'm sure this deal comes as a massive shock to the system, not just for Avalanche fans, but also for the players themselves. I can't imagine some of the jaws that were on the floor on Friday night in Boston as they're preparing for Saturday afternoon's game as words started to filter out. And if you're Nathan MacKinnon or Cale Makar, to even hear some news like that your team's chances, at least in the here and now, as you see it, may be a little bit weakened and a lot more for them to do. I think the Avalanche got to a place where they drew a line in the sand. They weren't going to pay Mikko Rantanen above what Nathan MacKinnon is earning on their cap table at $12.6 million, even though the salary cap's going up. The Rantanen camp, I believe, was much closer to $14 million. He has the same agents as Leon Draisaitl. They know what that market looks like. Important to point out, there is no extension in place between Rantanen and the Carolina Hurricanes. As I mentioned, this deal still very much of a shock on Friday night. I don't think anyone from the Rantanen camp saw this deal coming, at least in the here and now. And he did have a 9-team no-trade list, by the way. If this was on it, didn't need to get a heads up or certainly approve it, and was not brought in to negotiate a new deal. Carolina has a willingness to maybe play a little bit risky and give up some assets without that being guaranteed. Think back to last year. They made one of the biggest splashes at the trade deadline, bringing in Jake Gensel, and they didn't end up extending him, and he walked to the Tampa Bay Lightning in free agency. Not saying that's a predictor in this case. I'd think if you could get your hands on a player of this caliber, that you do anything you can to try and keep him if you're the Canes. We'll see how that unfolds. And quickly, from the Chicago Blackhawks standpoint, they're the third-party broker here, the third team involved to move some of the money around. The interesting thing, and kind of actually forgot to mention it, is former Hart Trophy winner Taylor Hall. He is going from Chicago to Carolina. They get better on both sides of the ice on the wing, and they actually didn't have to give anything up to get him. It's a third-round pick. Chicago gets their own third-round pick back in 2025, which will obviously be almost close to a second-round pick the way the season is shaping up for the Hawks. I think they wanted to find a fresh start for Taylor Hall, and they get that pick back in exchange for retaining 50% of Mikko Rantanen's salary. Man, that's a mouthful. But this is a trade that we're going to be talking about for a long, long time. And as sources indicated on Friday night, this deal that was on the table for Mikko Rantanen was not one of the crazier names that was on the table in the last 48 to 72 hours floating around the league. Doesn't mean something else is imminent. It just means that there's a lot happening in the NHL at this point in time. For the latest, stay tuned to Daily Faceoff, and if you enjoyed this video, give us a like or subscribe. Have a great night, hockey fans.